My name is Detective Jake Miller, and if you're hearing this, it means I made it out. Just barely. It's been years since that night, but it still haunts me every damn day. I don't know why I'm talking about it now, maybe because the nightmares still come and I can't silence them anymore. It's hard to believe that the worst night of my life started with a simple phone call. It was late, almost midnight, when I got the dispatch. A routine break-in report. Usually, those are nothing more than a false alarm or a minor theft. But this call. I should have known. I should have called for backup, but something told me to go alone. The house was on the outskirts of town, near the woods. The kind of place that feels abandoned even when people are living there. When I got there, the streetlights barely lit the road, and I could see the windows of the house dimly glowing. It looked like someone was still awake, which didn't match the initial report. The caller said no one was home. I knocked, and it felt wrong. No one answered. So, I opened the door. That's when I should have turned around. I walked in, and the silence hit me first. It wasn't the usual eerie silence that comes with an empty house. It was something deeper, a silence that made your skin crawl. My flashlight flicked on, and I started scanning the rooms, thinking maybe I'd catch someone trying to loot the place. The living room was empty, but something didn't feel right. I moved cautiously through the hallway, my boots echoing louder than they should have. And then I saw it. Blood. It was on the floor, smeared all the way down the hallway, leading into the kitchen. I stopped, my hand gripping my gun tighter than usual. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I've been on this job long enough to know that blood never leads to anything good. I took another step forward and heard a creak behind me. My heart stopped. For a split second, I thought I was just imagining things, but then, it happened again. I spun around, ready to face whatever was coming. The house felt like it was closing in on me. Every creak, every small noise felt amplified. But I didn't see anyone. The hallway was empty. But the smell hit me next. It wasn't just blood. It was the kind of stench that makes you gag, a mix of decay and rot. I forced myself to move forward, even though every instinct was screaming at me to leave. The kitchen door was ajar. I pushed it open. And that's when I saw her. A woman, lying face down in a pool of blood. I rushed to her, checking for signs of life, but there was nothing. Not a breath, not a pulse. And that's when I heard it. A sound from upstairs. A faint shuffling noise, like something, or someone, was moving around. I stood frozen, my heart racing. Who's up there? I shouted, but the house remained eerily quiet. I moved slowly toward the stairs, as I reached the bottom of the stairs, the noise stopped. But I knew something was up there. And it wasn't just another person. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, every nerve in my body tense, waiting for the next sound. The silence felt heavier now, almost suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me from the shadows. But I had a job to do. I had to find out what was going on, and why that woman was dead on the kitchen floor. I started up the stairs slowly, my flashlight illuminating the dark staircase. The wood creaked under my weight, each step feeling like it was drawing me deeper into something I couldn't escape. The upstairs was completely dark, no light except for the beam from my flashlight. It wasn't until I reached the top that I saw it, a door, slightly cracked open, leading to a bedroom. I approached the door cautiously, my hand shaking, my grip tight on my weapon. I called out again, my voice strained, "Is anyone in there?" Nothing. No reply. Just the eerie silence that filled the house. I pushed the door open, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. The stench from downstairs had followed me up, but now it was worse. It was suffocating, a nauseating mix of blood and decay, thick enough to make my stomach churn. The room was small and sparse, only a bed, a dresser, and a single window. The moonlight filtering through the window cast long shadows across the floor. And that's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, crouched down on the floor, was something, or someone. A figure, hunched over, as if it were hiding from me. At first, I couldn't make out any details, just a shape that didn't belong. My heart raced, adrenaline kicking in. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice shaking with fear and authority. The figure didn't move. For a moment, I thought it might be another victim. But then, it shifted. It was too fast. It was like it wasn't even human. Before I could react, it lunged at me. I barely had time to react, firing my weapon in panic. The sound of the gunshot rang out, deafening in the small room, but the figure didn't stop. I missed. The thing was too fast, too agile. It knocked me to the floor with terrifying strength, sending my gun skittering across the room. I tried to scramble away, but I couldn't move fast enough. My breath came in ragged gasps as I looked up into the face of what had attacked me. It was a woman, though not fully. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, a sickly yellow, her face pale with dark veins visible beneath the skin. Her mouth was open, but instead of words, a low, guttural growl came from her. The smell of rot was overpowering. I tried to fight back, kicking and punching, but it was like fighting a beast. She was impossibly strong, her fingers digging into my wrist like claws. I could feel the heat of her breath on my neck, the sound of her teeth snapping together just inches from my face. Everything in me screamed to run, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I might die right there, in that dimly lit room, at the hands of some monster. Then, out of nowhere, the door flew open. A figure burst into the room, another officer. It was Officer David Hayes, my partner. "Jake," he shouted, his voice filled with urgency. Without thinking, he grabbed the thing off of me, pulling it away with surprising strength. I scrambled backward, my chest heaving with panic as I grabbed for my gun again. David aimed and fired. 3 shots. The figure, no, the woman, jerked with each shot but didn't fall. The bullets didn't stop her. She screeched, an inhuman sound that made my skin crawl. "Get out!" David yelled, looking back at me. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and bolted for the door, adrenaline pushing me faster than I thought possible. But when I reached the stairs, I heard it again. The sound of movement. More. There were more of them. I didn't look back. I just ran. I didn't dare to look back as I sprinted down the stairs. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I heard the sound of feet behind me, but I couldn't tell if it was David or something else chasing me. All I knew was that I needed to get out of that house, fast. I reached the front door and yanked it open with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck. I pulled harder, desperation creeping into my movements, but the door wouldn't move. Something was blocking it from the other side. "David!" I shouted, but there was no answer. I glanced around, my mind racing for an escape. The house felt like it was closing in on me. The sound of footsteps was getting closer now, and I could hear something, no, someone, breathing heavily, just out of sight. I turned, searching frantically for another way out. My eyes darted around the hallway, and that's when I saw the basement door. It was small and unassuming, hidden away behind a cluttered shelf. I didn't know what was down there, but it was better than staying upstairs. I ran to the door, wrenching it open. The darkness inside was suffocating. But I didn't care. I stepped down into the basement, feeling the cold air hit me as I descended. The stairs creaked under my weight, but I didn't slow down. The basement was pitch black, with only the dim light of my flashlight to guide me. I could hear movement from above, the soft creak of floorboards, and the occasional muffled growl. They were still out there. I kept moving, trying to steady my breathing, trying to stay quiet. The basement seemed to stretch forever. It was full of old furniture, boxes, and broken items that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The smell down here was worse than anywhere else in the house, something musty, rotten, like death itself had taken root. Then, I heard something. A voice. It was faint at first, like a whisper, but then it became clearer. "Help, me." I froze. The voice sounded familiar. It sounded like the woman from the kitchen. But how could she be down here? She was dead, wasn't she? I took another step forward, the light from my flashlight flickering, casting eerie shadows against the walls. The voice came again, a little louder now. "Please, help." I moved cautiously toward the source of the sound, my breath quickening. I couldn't see anything in the dark, but the voice was coming from behind a stack of old crates. I stepped closer, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw what was on the other side. It was her. The woman from the kitchen. She was kneeling on the floor, her back turned to me, her head hanging low. Blood was still smeared across her clothes, but she wasn't moving. She was just sitting there, her body twitching occasionally, as if waiting for something. I reached out slowly, my hand trembling, unsure if she was alive or dead. And that's when I heard it. A snap. The sound of something large and fast moving toward me. I spun around, but it was too late. A figure lunged at me from the shadows. This one was faster than the woman, its arms long and twisted, its face a grotesque mask of distortion and rage. It slammed into me with a sickening crack, and I hit the cold concrete floor, my flashlight falling from my hand. My mind was racing. I had no weapon, no way to fight back. The thing on top of me growled, its breath rancid and hot against my skin. It pressed down harder, its fingers wrapping around my neck. I gasped for air, my vision starting to fade. I couldn't move. My body was going numb. And then, in that final moment before everything went black, I heard a voice. "Jake, get up." David's voice. With what little strength I had left, I forced my eyes open. David was standing in front of me, holding a flashlight and a crowbar. Without thinking, he swung the crowbar into the creature's face, knocking it off of me with a sickening crunch. I gasped, taking in a desperate breath of air. David helped me to my feet, his eyes wide with panic. "We need to get out. Now." We didn't need any more convincing. We bolted for the stairs, both of us moving as fast as we could. But as we neared the door, the ground beneath us seemed to shake. I turned to look behind me. The basement was filled now. Filled with the creatures. More of them. Dozens, all hunched and twisted, their yellow eyes glowing in the dark. And they were all coming for us. David and I didn't say a word. There was no time for words. We ran. The sound of footsteps and low growls followed us, echoing through the basement like a chorus of nightmares. We didn't dare look back as we climbed the stairs two at a time, our breath ragged, feet pounding against the wooden steps. My heart was pounding in my chest like a drumbeat, each thud a reminder that we were being hunted. We reached the top of the stairs and made a mad dash for the front door. I didn't care that it was still jammed, there was no time to waste. With all the strength I had left, I threw myself against the door, shoulder first, slamming into it. The door cracked open with a loud splintering sound, and just as I thought we might make it, a scream pierced the air. It was a voice I recognized. It was the woman from the kitchen. Her voice was faint, but it was clear as day. "Help me, please." I froze for a split second, my body torn between running for my life and investigating. I turned to David, but he didn't hesitate. His hand shot out, grabbing my arm and yanking me toward the door. "Jake, now," he shouted. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. I tried to ignore the voice, the urge to look back, but it was impossible. It clawed at my insides, pulling me back toward the house. I had no idea what I was hearing, or what had happened to her, but I knew one thing for sure, there was something wrong about this place. Something beyond the dead woman in the kitchen, something that didn't make sense. We burst out of the house and into the cold night air. The streetlights cast long, haunting shadows across the yard. But it didn't feel like we were safe yet. I could hear the creatures still moving inside, their footsteps echoing in the silence. David was already at his car, yanking open the door. "Get in, Jake. We're not sticking around to find out what else is in there." I didn't argue. I jumped into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut behind me. David gunned the engine, and the car peeled out of the driveway, kicking up gravel as we sped away. But even as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following us. Something was out there, in the darkness, watching us. The road ahead seemed endless, and every turn we took felt like it led us deeper into a nightmare. David didn't speak for the first few minutes, his hands gripping the wheel tight, his knuckles white. I stared out the window, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't put into words. What had happened in that house? What were those things? And why the hell had I felt like I needed to go back? Finally, David broke the silence. "You good?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared out into the night, trying to push away the feeling that something was wrong. But the feeling only grew stronger the farther we drove. "I don't know, man," I finally said. I think I saw something. I don't think those things are just human. I don't know what they are, but they're not people." David glanced at me briefly before focusing back on the road. "You don't think?" "I know," I replied, my voice low. "And whatever they are, they're not done with us." We didn't talk after that. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the road and the occasional crackle of the police radio. We kept driving, the night growing darker around us. And then, just as we turned down a quiet street, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure. Standing at the edge of the road, watching us. It was her. The woman. She stood there, in the middle of the street, her face pale and twisted, her eyes glowing yellow in the headlights. Her mouth opened, and she screamed. But it wasn't a scream of pain or fear. It was a scream of rage. David slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car lurched forward, and everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, the car was stopped. My head was pounding like a drum, and everything was blurry. I tried to move, but my body felt like it was made of lead. I could still hear the echo of that scream in my ears, that scream from the woman, or whatever she was now. David was unconscious next to me, his head resting on the steering wheel. I managed to shake him awake, my voice hoarse, barely able to form words. "David, wake up." He groaned and slowly lifted his head. His eyes flickered open, and for a moment, there was nothing but confusion. Then, panic. He looked around the car, his breath quickening. "What the hell happened?" he gasped. I didn't have an answer. The car had come to a stop in the middle of the street, and I couldn't see anything outside. It was as if the world had swallowed us whole, leaving us in an endless void of darkness. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl, just outside the car. I froze. David was already reaching for the door handle, his eyes wide with fear. "Get out, Jake. We have to move. Now." We both scrambled out of the car. The air was cold, cutting through me like a knife, but it wasn't the cold that made my blood run cold. It was the silence. No cars, no streetlights, just an eerie, unnatural stillness. "Where are we?" I whispered. "I don't know," David replied, his voice trembling. "This isn't the route we were on. Something's not right." We looked around, trying to make sense of where we were. The houses on the street were dark, windows boarded up, doors sealed shut. It was like we had driven into a ghost town. That's when I saw her again. The woman. She stood at the end of the street, her back to us. I could see her long, matted hair and the twisted form of her body as she swayed in the breeze, her movements jerky and unnatural. Her skin was pale, covered in blood, and I could see her mouth open, though no sound came out. The growl from before had stopped. The silence was deafening now, but I could feel something. Something out there, just waiting. "Jake, we can't go back to the car. We have to keep moving," David urged, his hand gripping my arm tightly. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, though every inch of my body screamed at me to run the other way. We started moving down the street, keeping our heads down, trying to stay as quiet as possible. But the woman didn't follow. Instead, she just stood there, staring at us, as if she were waiting for something. We passed house after house, each one more decayed and run down than the last. The atmosphere felt like something out of a nightmare. It wasn't just the darkness, it was the feeling that something was watching us from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then we heard it. A scream. Not the woman's, but a man's. A deep, desperate wail of terror. It came from somewhere ahead of us, from one of the houses. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. David nodded, his face pale. "We need to check it out. There could be others." I didn't want to go. I wanted to keep running, to get as far away from whatever this place was. But I knew he was right. We couldn't leave someone behind if they were in trouble. We approached the house the scream had come from. It looked like every other house on the street, dark, decrepit, abandoned. The front door was slightly open, swinging with the wind, and the sound of the scream echoed through the night air, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. David motioned for me to stay quiet as he slowly pushed the door open. We crept inside, weapons drawn. The interior was just as dark and decaying as the exterior, the air thick with the scent of mildew and rot. "Hello?" David called out softly, his voice barely a whisper. There was no response. Just the sound of our breathing and the faint echoes of movement upstairs. We moved cautiously through the house, up the stairs, and into a hallway where the scream had originated. The floor creaked beneath our feet. At the end of the hallway, there was another door, this one cracked open. David gestured for me to stay back, and he moved toward the door slowly, his gun raised. I stayed in the shadows, watching, waiting. David pushed the door open, and what we saw inside made my stomach turn. It was another woman, but this one was different. She was tied to a chair, her body bruised and bloodied, her eyes wide with terror. Her mouth was taped shut, but her eyes screamed for help. Standing over her was a figure. It wasn't human. It was something else, something twisted and wrong. Its skin was mottled, its face a grotesque mockery of a man's, but its eyes, they were empty, black, like a void. The thing turned its head toward us, its grin wide and sinister. And then it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, its voice low and guttural, sending a chill down my spine. And just like that, the door slammed shut. I stumbled back, the cold grip of terror seizing my chest. My heart hammered in my ears as I tried to steady myself. I couldn't breathe. The darkness around me felt suffocating, the air thick with dread. David wasn't moving. He was standing in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the thing in the room. His grip on the gun was shaking, and for the first time since we entered the house, I saw pure fear in his eyes. "We have to go," I whispered, but David didn't seem to hear me. The thing inside the room didn't move, its dark, empty eyes fixed on us with an unsettling calm. Then, as if it were reading our thoughts, it spoke again. "You think you can escape?" It grinned, showing rows of jagged teeth that shouldn't have belonged to any living creature. Before I could react, it lunged at us. The speed was unreal. It moved faster than I could process, its body shifting unnaturally, its limbs snapping into grotesque positions. I saw David fire, but the bullets didn't seem to matter. The thing didn't stop. It was on him in a split second, knocking the gun from his hand. David screamed as it clawed at him, its nails like daggers tearing into his flesh. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I ran toward them, grabbing the crowbar from the floor beside the door where David had dropped it earlier. I swung it at the creature with all the strength I had left, slamming it into its back. It hissed, but it didn't stop. I swung again. This time, it recoiled, giving me a brief opening. I grabbed David's arm, pulling him away, dragging him backward. His face was covered in blood, his body trembling. But the creature didn't let us escape. It charged again, but this time, I was ready. I swung the crowbar once more, and this time it connected with its face, knocking it off balance. The thing screeched, a noise that shattered the silence around us, and I took the chance. Run! I screamed. We didn't look back. We ran, barreling down the hallway, ignoring the screams, the growls, the sound of something chasing us from behind. My legs felt like lead, but I didn't stop. We reached the front door. I didn't care about the risk. I shoved it open with all my strength, and we ran into the night. The darkness seemed to swallow us whole, but I didn't care. We were out. We had made it. David and I didn't speak as we ran. I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. We didn't stop until we reached the car. I slammed the door shut, the engine roaring to life with one turn of the key. We sped away from that house, that nightmare, not daring to look back. But I knew the truth. The nightmare wasn't over. It wasn't just in that house. The thing, whatever it was still out there. And it wasn't done with us. And that's the story of what happened that night. The real story. The one I'm telling you now because I survived. We survived. I don't know if anyone else made it out. I don't know what those creatures were or where they came from, but I've seen their eyes. I've felt their presence, and I know it's not over. I didn't just leave the house that night, I left a part of myself behind. Something is still out there. Watching. Waiting. And if you're ever on the outskirts of town, near the woods, remember my story. Because the woman you think you see might not be human. And the thing that's watching you from the shadows, well, let's just say it's waiting for the right moment to come for you next. Trust me, you don't want to find out what happens when it does.